Hello, I'm Jim Masters here from CityLife International Church in Sheffield, and welcome to our talk TV program. It is such a privilege to have John Glass with us, who was the previous Elim national leader. And I thought it'd be great for him to share a few things with us this morning in our service, and ask him some questions about what it means to be a father to many churches, and obviously many pastors as well. So John, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
It's wonderful that you're here today with us. Your ministry has really enlightened us. And just explain a little bit. I mean, how long were you a national leader for, and what were some of the challenges that you had being a national leader as well as a father to many pastors?
Okay, well, I was the elected leader of the Elim churches in the UK, which is about 550 churches.
Wow.
For between year 2000 and 2016, so 16 years.
Wow.
And yeah, that's the length of time I was doing it for. And then I was chair of council for the Evangelical Alliance for a number of years as well after that.
Amazing. So what are the challenges that you face with some of these pastors, to generalise, obviously?
Yeah, so it's a huge question, because obviously 1,000 pastors is a lot of people. But I tried, when I was working, although I was in the role I was in, to spend at least 20% of all my time one-to-one with leaders, because I believe relationship and authenticity is very important.
Fantastic.
So I didn't want to be sort of a distant figure behind a desk somewhere in the country. So there's a phrase in the management world called MBWA, which is management by walking around. And so that you make yourself available. And I think it's nice of you to refer to me as a spiritual father at my age, and being available to people is the most important thing.
Well,
not just to give some gems of advice, but willing to listen.
Yeah.
People, particularly leaders, they don't want more information. They've already got it because they're leading other people, but they do want someone to listen to them.
Yeah.
And so in some respects, a spiritual father is a very lovely term, but you know, when anybody's building anything, putting a new kitchen in, the first thing they put in before they build is a skip, where they can dump a lot of stuff that shouldn't be there, so they can put new stuff in. And sometimes we try to fit new stuff into ministry before we've dumped some of the stuff that's painful. So in some respects, without giving gems of advice to everybody, I also like to act as a skip so people can share where they're at.
Okay, wonderful. What a great metaphor that is. What advice would you give to someone who's just starting out in ministry, or who wants to go full time and run a church?
Well, the first and most important thing, God is much more, and this is a bit of a cliche, but it's still true, He's much more concerned with our character than our charisma. And so it's not our gifting that is the most important thing. It's our sense of loyalty to God, integrity, authenticity is a huge thing, so that we're living real and being real, that we don't minister from behind a mask or any place of pretense.
Yeah. Brilliant, fantastic. And so in terms of people that you have actually spoken life into, impartation into, has there been anything that you've ever felt that you could not give advice to, or to that person?
Well, you know, there's the basic premise when you're talking to anybody who's asking for advice, that they're willing to listen to what you say and possibly do it. Now, what I don't do in the role I'm in now, I'm retired from the national role, is that, and the people I'm dealing with are not like young ministers. They're usually people in their 40s, the age that my sons would be if I had sons. And so really, and I don't hold them accountable. What I do is I say, look, I've listened to you, I think this is what God is saying in your situation. I advise you to consider these options, and then it's up to them whether they do that. But if they come just in order to speak to me but with no intention of doing anything, then it's wasting both of our time, really. So before I engage in that area, I usually only deal with people who are willing to act upon what we're sharing.
You mentioned in our Bible school about something to do with accountability, and so you strongly feel that every pastor, every leader should have some kind of accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very important for people to, within our peer group, I'm not talking about people over us, under us, within our peer group, that we have a group of people. I've always had it in my life, for all my ministry, people who will ask us the hard questions, people who won't flatter, but people who will really address the issues in our lives, about our marriages, about how we conduct our diary, our attitudes, and it's very, very important to do that. Some people call that a spiritual covering, but there's a limitation to all of that, even though it's good. For example, owning an umbrella does not keep you dry.
Right. Okay.
So if it's I'm in your studio, if it was raining outside, I would get drenched. It's not because I don't own a covering. I own a covering.
Right.
I own an umbrella. Unfortunately, it's in the boot of my car.
Right. Okay.
So when people like me, you turn spiritual fathers, seek to be a covering, there's an expectation that people will stay within the parameters of that advice.
Fantastic.
And it's not just them as well. I need to keep in parameters of my own advice
exactly.
as well. We all need to do that.
Yeah.
So having a covering, having someone to speak into our life is good.
Yeah.
But like living under umbrella or staying under umbrella when it's raining, you've got to do that with your spiritual advice as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. And another thing that I always preach to my congregation is that, I would never preach anything that I don't do myself.
That's right.
And so I feel that's the same with yourself, isn't it? That
I try to do that.
You're giving other people advice, but as long as you've followed those advices yourself as well,
Well, we live in a spotlight, but people can see us. I mean, out of my 50 years as a minister, 52 years, half of that has been a pastor of a local church. So if I'm telling my people one thing, and they can see me in the week, I mean, the pulpit's a goldfish bowl, really. So you have to realise that people see you Monday to Saturday as well as Sunday.
Yeah, and I think that's leading by example, and we all need to do that, because we've heard so many, ministers that they fall because they don't lead by example. They would preach, but unfortunately they don't follow their own preaching. I think probably the last question I like to ask you, and it's a loaded question, is where do you think the nation is going with churches? Did you see anything, in 2022? What do you see coming up in 2022 or 2023 or even further down the future? Is there anything you can give?
But there's a verse in the scripture that says God is shaking everything that can be shaken.
Right, okay.
So the things that cannot be shaken will remain. And so what happens is when we go through things like a pandemic, when we go through things like what's going on in Ukraine, and of course we're not going through it, but there will be repercussions in terms of people's lives in the West as well as Ukraine. When all that's happening, it's shaking people about, and it's getting us to see what our priorities are as individuals, as leaders, and as churches as well. And it's a bit like a sieve.
Yeah.
It's like when you shake a sieve, that which is secondary and not of great worth, it falls through and leaves you.
Wow, yeah.
May leaves you with a fraction of what you began with, but what you're left with is good.
Oh, brilliant, fantastic.
And I think that's what's happening in the church today.
Wonderful.
What we're going to be left with in terms after the shaking is going to be something as a great foundation to build into a great future.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us with our TV program here. I'd like to thank John Glass for coming and ministering in our church, and also you listening to Words of Wisdom here. And I just pray that you will take this information and you will bring it to your heart and use it to the best of your knowledge and the best of your ministry. Obviously, this isn't just applied to pastors who run a church, but evangelists, apostles, prophets, and teachers as well. Hold yourself accountable, and when you're preaching and teaching, follow what you're preaching and teaching as well. Thanks very much for joining us, Jim Masters.